The devastation of a fire left my home in ruins. At 65 years old, I sought solace at my son's residence, only to be met with rejection. He cited his fiancée's need for personal space. In my despair, I reached out to my very first love, a man I had not encountered in 4 decades. When he opened the grand doors of his estate, his words were few but profound. "You've finally come home." My existence was irrevocably altered. Before we delve deeper into my narrative, please ensure you are subscribed to our channel and share your location in the comments below. We cherish understanding the global reach of our stories. My name is Grace, and at 65 years of age, I believed I had weathered every conceivable hardship life could present. I was mistaken. It all commenced on a Wednesday in Charlotte, North Carolina, a day seemingly no different from any other. I was preparing my afternoon coffee in the kitchen when an unusual odor permeated the air. Concerned I might have left something on the stove, I investigated. Upon opening the living room doorway, I was confronted by an impenetrable curtain of smoke, rendering visibility almost impossible. Flames were already engulfing the draperies and ascending the walls with alarming rapidity, leaving me momentarily frozen by shock. The smoke alarm should have been blaring, but I later learned its battery had been depleted months prior, a trivial oversight that would result in the loss of all my possessions. I retreated to the kitchen, frantically searching for my telephone to contact the fire department. However, smoke had permeated every corner, making breathing difficult and rational thought elusive. The sound of shattering glass alerted me to the dwindling time. The inferno was consuming my house with a ferocity that appeared insurmountable. My sole focus became survival. I snatched my purse from the kitchen table and fled through the rear exit. The final image etched into my memory before I burst into the open air was the portrait of Robert, my late husband, beginning to char from the intense heat. My neighbors were already assembling in the street when I emerged, gasping for breath and coughing uncontrollably. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor who was 78 years old, was the first to approach, embracing me as we both watched, helpless, as the blaze consumed the house I had inhabited for over 40 years. The fire department arrived within 10 minutes, but it was tragically too late. They succeeded in preventing the fire's spread to adjacent residences, but my home was beyond reclamation. In merely 1 hour, 4 decades of cherished memories were reduced to embers. The kitchen table where David once completed his assignments, the walls bearing the height markings of my son's growth, the bedroom I shared with Robert for 37 years, all were gone. I stood on the sidewalk, swaddled in a blanket provided by a kind stranger, while the firefighters executed their duties. Later, I was informed that the most probable cause was a short circuit originating from an antiquated living room electrical outlet, a simple electrical malfunction that had reduced my life to ashes. The flames eventually receded, leaving behind only a scorched, smoldering shell. The fire chief approached, his face smudged with soot, his eyes reflecting a profound pity I could not bear at that moment. "I am profoundly sorry, Mum. We exerted every possible effort." He did not need to finish his sentence. The devastation was self-evident, a complete and utter loss. All that I owned, apart from the attire I wore and the contents of my handbag, had vanished. For the initial night, I found refuge with my fortunate neighbors who still possessed their homes. The kind Mrs. Jenkins extended an offer for me to stay with her, but her modest apartment was already occupied by visiting grandchildren. The American Red Cross had established emergency shelters, yet the prospect of sleeping in a gymnasium alongside strangers amplified my sense of desolation. It was then that I recognized the necessity of contacting David. My son resided approximately a 40-minute drive away in Valentine, an affluent Charlotte suburb characterized by tree-lined avenues and residences that appeared to be lifted directly from a magazine. He had relocated there 4 years prior upon his promotion to regional manager at the insurance firm where he was employed. Our relationship was not particularly intimate, not in the manner that mothers and sons typically are, but he was the entirety of my remaining family. I utilized Mrs. Jenkins's telephone, as mine had been destroyed along with everything else. "David, my darling, it's Mom," I conveyed, my voice weaker than I had intended. "Mum, what's wrong? You sound distressed." "There was a fire, son. The house is gone. Everything is gone." A silence ensued, stretching into what felt like an eternity. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm quite all right, merely a few abrasions and a sore throat from the smoke. However, I require a place to stay while I navigate these circumstances. Merely temporarily." Another pause. "Of course, Mum. Come on over. We will manage it." The wave of relief that washed over me was so potent I nearly faltered. My son would provide for me. Despite the distance between us, the missed calls, and the awkward holiday gatherings, he was still my child. The following morning I remained near the charred remains, awaiting the arrival of the insurance adjuster. He appeared punctually at 9 o'clock, a young man who seemed to wish he were anywhere else, appraising the remnants of my dwelling with a clipboard and a camera. "A total loss," he stated pragmatically, as if those two words did not encapsulate my entire existence. "How much?" I inquired, dreading the response. "Well, you had a policy valued at approximately $200,000 for the structure, but factoring in your deductible and depreciation, we are looking at perhaps $90,000, possibly less." $90,000 to reconstruct 42 years of life seemed an insurmountable proposition. Mrs. Jenkins assisted me in purchasing essential clothing and toiletries, using the emergency funds provided by the Red Cross. All that I now possessed could fit into a single, small, borrowed suitcase. That was it. It was the sum total of the life I had meticulously built. The drive to David's residence felt akin to a journey into uncharted territory. Familiar locales, the petrol station where I invariably purchased lottery tickets, the diner where Robert and I used to savor Sunday breakfasts, all seemed to belong to another person's existence. David's neighborhood, as usual, was impeccably maintained. Pristine lawns, immaculate sidewalks, and lives continuing precisely as they had the day prior. I felt like an interloper, introducing my tragedy into their unblemished world. His home was a 2-story colonial, distinguished by white shutters and a crimson door selected by Victoria, his fiancée. I had met her precisely 3 times in the 2 years they had been a couple. She was 30 years old and he was 39. She was employed at a marketing firm downtown and possessed an opinion on every conceivable subject, from the hue of the walls to the appropriate vintage of wine for dinner. I guided the taxi into their driveway and remained stationary for a moment, gathering my resolve. "This is temporary," I reassured myself, "simply until I can ascertain my next steps, merely until the insurance funds are dispersed and I can procure a modest apartment somewhere." I had never envisioned that approaching my son's front door with my small, borrowed suitcase would constitute one of the most challenging endeavors of my life. Yet, as I raised my hand to knock, a familiar sense of dread washed over me, the same hollow sensation I experienced upon Robert's passing, as if the ground were giving way beneath my feet. I simply did not yet comprehend the depth to which I was about to descend. David opened the door before I could knock, as if he had been anticipating my arrival. For an instant, observing his familiar countenance, Robert's eyes, my own obstinate chin, I felt a flicker of hope that all might be well. He was my son, my only child. Surely familial bonds held significance. "Mom," he uttered, stepping aside to admit me, though his voice carried an intonation I couldn't quite decipher. Distance, perhaps, or a sense of unease. Victoria materialized behind him almost instantaneously, as though poised in the wings. She was attired in white denim and a silk blouse that likely cost more than my monthly grocery expenditure. Her brown hair was artfully confined in one of those seemingly disheveled buns that paradoxically appeared perfectly arranged, and her smile was the sort that never quite reached her eyes. "Grace, how utterly dreadful about your home," she remarked, her gaze fixed on my worn suitcase rather than on me. David informed me of the incident. I placed my suitcase in their immaculate entryway, suddenly acutely aware of my appearance. My newly acquired attire, inexpensive and plain, seemed incongruous against the polished marble of the hall. Despite having showered at Mrs. Jenkins's residence, the scent of smoke still clung to my hair. "It is merely temporary," I stated hastily, "just until I can regain my footing." David and Victoria exchanged a knowing glance, one of those unspoken marital exchanges that effectively excludes everyone else in the room. I had witnessed Robert and I engage in similar silent communication countless times, but from an external perspective, it felt as though they were excluding me from an exclusive club I was unaware existed. "Let us sit and converse," David proposed, guiding me toward the living room. Their home was a paragon of magazine-worthy aesthetics. Everything coordinated harmoniously. Not a single item was out of place. White furnishings that suggested they had never been occupied. Glass coffee tables that artfully reflected the light from windows so pristine they appeared invisible. It was the kind of residence where one felt hesitant to touch anything. I settled on the edge of the immaculate sofa, my new shoes planted firmly on the flawless hardwood flooring. Victoria noticed and flinched almost imperceptibly. "So, what is the plan?" David inquired, positioning himself in the armchair opposite me, rather than beside me on the sofa, where he might have offered a comforting arm to his distressed mother. It felt as though we were engaged in a business negotiation. "Well, the insurance adjuster indicated it would require a few weeks to process everything, perhaps a month. I was hoping I could reside here until then, simply until I locate a small apartment or similar." The ensuing silence stretched for approximately 10 seconds longer than was natural. I observed Victoria's expression shift. I perceived her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She leaned forward and placed her hand on David's arm, a gesture that appeared supportive but was undeniably possessive. "Mum," David commenced, and I recognized from his tone that what was about to follow would shatter my heart. "The situation is, Victoria and I have been discussing this, and we highly value our personal space here. We work extended hours, and this is our sanctuary, if you comprehend my meaning." I blinked, not fully grasping the implication. "I would not impede your activities. I would maintain my solitude. I will assist with cooking and cleaning. I will not be a burden." Victoria leaned forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "It is not about being a burden, Grace. It is about personal space. This home is our first dwelling together, and we are still establishing our shared rhythm as a couple." "I am his mother," I asserted, the words emerging with a sharper edge than I had intended. "Of course you are," Victoria responded smoothly, "and that is precisely why we believed you would find a more comfortable arrangement elsewhere, a place where you can maintain your independence while you rebuild." I looked at David, expecting him to refute her statement, to recall that I was the woman who had stayed awake with him through every fever, who had worked double shifts to fund his college textbooks, who had held his hand through his divorce 3 years prior when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. "Victoria is correct, Mum. We believe you would be happier with your own space." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I felt a distinct constriction in my chest, as though my lungs were being squeezed. "Happier, David? I lost everything yesterday, everything. And you believe I would be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family? It does not have to be a hotel, Victoria interjected quickly. There are some lovely extended stay establishments near the mall, quite clean and secure, and they feature small kitchenettes so you can prepare your own meals. I stared at this woman who had been in my son's life for a mere 2 years, dictating where I should reside after the loss of my home. And how am I expected to finance this delightful extended stay establishment? The insurance funds will not be available for weeks. David shifted uncomfortably. I could contribute to that, a few $100s to get you started. A few $100s? As if I were a distant relative he barely knew, not the woman who gave him life. David, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I changed your diapers, I soothed you through your colic, I taught you how to ride a bicycle, and I assisted you with your homework. I held you when you cried because Lucia Velasco broke your heart in high school. His expression contorted slightly, but Victoria tightened her grip on his arm. No one is questioning your history, she stated. We simply believe that everyone would be more comfortable with certain boundaries. Boundaries? I had heard that word from the therapist David had consulted following his divorce. Everything revolved around boundaries. You are evicting me, I declared flatly. We are not evicting you, David protested. We are merely suggesting that perhaps this arrangement might not be conducive for anyone. Whose suggestion was this? I inquired, though I already suspected the answer. I could discern it from the way Victoria leaned back slightly, a look of quiet triumph on her face, as if she had achieved a victory. We discussed it together, David admitted, avoiding my gaze. I rose slowly, my knees creaking in a manner that reminded me of my 65 years and my solitary status in the world. I understand. Mum, please do not be like this. We are attempting to do what is best for everyone. What is best for everyone? I repeated the words as if they were uttered in a foreign tongue. What would be best for everyone, David, is if your mother did not have to sleep on the streets tonight. Victoria's meticulously applied makeup contorted into an expression of feigned concern. You will not have to sleep on the streets. As I mentioned, there are options available. I cast one final glance around the immaculate living room, at the family portraits that featured David and Victoria, but conspicuously excluded me, at the expensive furniture that no one was permitted to truly inhabit, at my son who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. You are correct, I finally stated. There are always options. I retrieved my small suitcase. Its weight felt significantly heavier now that I understood where I was not welcome. David rose, appearing uneasy, though not sufficiently so to alter his decision. I will call you in a few days, he said, as soon as you are settled somewhere. Do not trouble yourself, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. I would not wish to intrude upon your sanctuary. Victoria exhibited a fleeting moment of apparent shame, yet it was insufficient to prompt her to speak. Not enough to utter, "Wait, this is incorrect. She is your mother." I departed from that perfect residence, with its perfect couple and their meticulously defined boundaries, and stood on the sidewalk for a considerable duration before I could compel myself to walk. Through the front window I could observe David and Victoria conversing, likely discussing my perceived difficult nature and the disruption I was introducing into their tranquil existence. The irony was not lost on me. For years following Robert's demise, I had convinced myself of my own strength and independence, proclaiming that I required no one. Now, at a moment when I genuinely needed assistance, I discovered that independence is a luxury afforded only when one possesses choices. I walked to a modest budget hotel situated on the corner and expended nearly all my remaining funds on a room for the night. Seated on the unyielding bed, gazing at the peeling wallpaper, I attempted to ascertain the next steps for a 65-year-old woman with virtually no financial resources and only a single suitcase of inexpensive clothing. It was then that I recalled the business card I had carried in my wallet for nearly 40 years, miraculously preserved because it was with me at the time of the fire, its edges yellowed with age and its surface softened from frequent handling. A card I never anticipated actually using, from a man I loved when the world was young and all things seemed possible. Randall Galloway, the man who had promised to return for me. The day before, life intervened, and that day never materialized. I spent 3 nights in that inexpensive hotel before I mustered the courage to make the call. 3 nights of waking with an aching back from the thin mattress and the lingering taste of humiliation. 3 nights of listening to arguments in the hallway and the incessant drone of traffic outside the poorly insulated window. 3 nights of washing my few new garments in the small bathroom and hanging them to dry on the room's solitary chair. The business card felt like delicate tissue paper between my fingers, worn smooth from 4 decades of safekeeping but never use. Randall Galloway was inscribed in faded blue ink. Beneath that, a telephone number with an area code unfamiliar to me. On the reverse, in my own youthful penmanship, I had written, "Never forget G." I had penned those words when I was 25, holding with the absolute conviction of youth that Randall Galloway would be the great love of my existence. He was 26 with dark hair that often fell across his forehead and eyes the color of golden amber. He had worked for his father's construction firm after college and harbored ambitions of achieving greater things, of constructing something of lasting significance. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 years old felt like an eternity. He would take me to the scenic overlook on the hills outside the city, where we would sit on the hood of his car and discuss our aspirations. "I am going to establish my own enterprise," he would declare with conviction, perhaps in construction or real estate development. "Something that will render me affluent enough to provide you with everything you deserve. I will return for you, Grace." He had made that promise the night before he departed for a project in Atlanta. "I am going to make something of myself, and then I will come back and marry you." However, promises made at 25 years old tend to fade when confronted with the realities of life. He initially sent letters, long, passionate missives filled with dreams and future plans. I responded, detailing my employment at the bank and my unwavering patience, just as I had pledged. Subsequently, the letters became shorter and less frequent. When I met Robert 6 months later at a church event, Randall seemed like a beautiful dream I had once harbored, too exquisite to be real. Robert was stable, dependable, already 32 years old and employed in a reputable position at the telephone company. He did not promise me the world, but he offered a home, a family, security. When he proposed after 5 months of courtship, I accepted. I placed Randall's business card in the pocket of my wedding gown, a secret talisman I could not bring myself to discard. Now, 40 years later, seated in a modest hotel room, redolent of dampness and stale cigarette smoke, I pondered what had become of that dreamy man with the amber eyes. I had occasionally inquired about him over the years, as one does with first loves. Through mutual acquaintances, I had heard that he had indeed fulfilled his promises, that he had founded a construction company, and that he had achieved considerable success. He never married, much to others' surprise. They would remark that Galloway was perpetually driven by ambition, too occupied with building his empire. The last I had heard, approximately 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond North Carolina into Atlanta, Georgia, and Miami, Florida. Galloway Development, responsible for constructing shopping centers and office complexes. The young man from the construction firm had transformed into the sort of individual who donned expensive suits and made decisions impacting hundreds of individuals. What possible interest would such a man have in a 65-year-old widow residing in a budget hotel with nothing more than a suitcase of apparel from Target? The rational part of my mind deemed it absurd, even pathetic. One does not contact someone after 40 years because their life has imploded. One does not seek out their youthful sweetheart when they are elderly, desperate, and have nowhere to turn. However, rational thought is a luxury when one is counting the quarters in their purse and attempting to determine if there is sufficient for one more night's lodging. On the fourth morning, I could endure it no longer. My back ached from the unsupportive mattress. My funds were dwindling, and the hotel had already issued a warning that they would require the room for an upcoming booking the following day. I sat at the small table in the room, my gaze fixed on the card. My hands trembling beyond the mere chill of the morning. What would I even say? "Hello, Randall. Do you remember me? I am now homeless. Can you assist me?" The number on the card was likely disconnected, or it would connect to a secretary who would politely inform me that Mr. Galloway was far too occupied to entertain calls from random women claiming to have known him in their youth. But what if it did not? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed the number. Each digit felt like a descent from a precipice. It rang once, then twice. Galloway Development, Randall on the line. His voice had deepened over the years, a richer timbre shaped by experience and the weight of his world, yet undeniably him. After 4 decades, I would have recognized that sound anywhere. I nearly severed the connection, almost initiated the end call sequence, and set off in pursuit of an alternative resolution. However, something in his intonation, a certain warmth that seemed to traverse the distance and envelop me like a comforting embrace, compelled me to speak. "Randall, it's Grace. Grace Thorne. Actually, I go by Grace Robert now, but Thorne was my name." A silence stretched, long enough for me to ponder if the line had gone dead, if he'd terminated the call, or if he truly had no recollection of who I was. Then, Grace, simply my name, uttered as if in reverence or astonished contemplation, as though he couldn't quite believe it. "I'm terribly sorry for calling so abruptly." I hurried, the words tumbling out in a cascade of desperation to provide context before he could disconnect. "I realize it's been a considerable time and I probably shouldn't be reaching out, but I found myself with no other recourse." "Whereabouts are you?" he inquired, cutting me off, his voice laced with a sharp note of concern. "I'm in Charlotte, staying at a place called the Rest Stop Motel, and I know this sounds unbelievable, but my house was destroyed by fire just last week. I've lost absolutely everything, and my son, he's not willing to have me stay with him, and I truly have nowhere else to turn." The confession spilled out in a torrent, each revelation more difficult than the one preceding it. To confess that one's own child had disowned you felt akin to admitting a fundamental failure in the very essence of being human. "Provide me with the precise location," Randall stated, his tone now purely businesslike. "I'm on my way to retrieve you." "You don't need to do that. I don't even know why I called. I suppose I just needed to hear a familiar voice." "Grace." His tone admitted no further debate. "Tell me where you are. I'm walking to my car this very moment." Faintly, through the receiver, I could discern the click of a door closing, the rumble of an engine coming to life. He was genuinely coming. This man, with whom I hadn't exchanged a word in 40 years, was setting aside whatever critical matters occupied him to extricate me from a modest roadside inn. I relayed the address, my voice barely above a whisper. "Randall, look, I'm not the woman you remember." "Neither am I," he replied, and I could detect the amusement in his voice. "But I've been anticipating this call for 40 years. After we concluded our conversation, I spent the subsequent hour packing my few possessions. oscillating between a sense of rising panic and profound disbelief. What was I embarking upon? What were we initiating? This was utterly preposterous. One simply could not resume a connection after 4 decades, as if it were a continuation of a chat from the day before. Yet as I gazed out the motel window, anticipating the arrival of a vehicle I wouldn't recognize, driven by a man who might not recognize me, I experienced a sensation I hadn't felt since prior to the conflagration. Hope. It might have been a misguided hope. It could very well have led to further disappointment and heartache, but it was hope nonetheless. And at 65 years of age, with nothing left to lose, hope seemed an entirely worthwhile gamble. Precisely at 10:45, a silver Mercedes glided to a halt before the establishment, its polished gleam a stark contrast to the somewhat weathered surroundings. I peered through the glass as the vehicle parked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped avian creature striving for release. The windows were darkly tinted, obscuring any view of the interior, but an instinct deep within me assured me it was him. The engine silenced and the driver's side door swung open. Even after 40 years, with silver streaking his hair and fine lines etching his face, even bearing the invisible burden of 20 years I had not shared, I identified him instantly. Randall Galloway emerged from that vehicle as if stepping directly from the pages of my own dreams. And as his gaze ascended to the window where I stood, the intervening years dissolved between us as though they had never existed. Clutching my solitary suitcase, I descended the stairs with the haste of one who fears a cherished dream might evaporate if lingered upon too long. He stood beside the car, awaiting my arrival. Randall possessed the same composed self-assurance that characterized him at 26, now refined and burnished by accomplishment and maturity. He was attired in dark denim and a navy blue sweater that likely commanded a price, exceeding my monthly grocery budget. But his eyes, those captivating amber eyes that had occupied my nocturnal wanderings for decades, remained precisely as I remembered. I felt an overwhelming urge to retreat, to return to my room, and pretend this encounter was not transpiring. I felt I looked utterly disheveled. My hair had been neglected for months. My modest attire was creased, and I felt insignificant, dwarfed by the elegant man standing before me. Yet he was already extending a smile, a gesture that sent a jolt through my heart as if I were 25 once more. I approached him deliberately, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello, Grace," he said softly. Looking at him, I could perceive the imprints of time. His once dark hair was now a distinguished salt and pepper, impeccably styled. Subtle lines framed the corners of his eyes and accentuated the contours of his mouth. He had developed a broader, more solid physique, as if prosperity had imparted a tangible gravitas to his very being. Yet as he smiled at me, I glimpsed the young man who used to escort me to the scenic overlook and confide his aspirations. "Hello?" I managed to articulate, my voice barely a murmur. He scrutinized my countenance for a considerable interval, those amber eyes absorbing every minute detail. I felt an impulse to offer an apology for my appearance, for my diminished circumstances, for contacting him after so many years with naught but complications to present. Instead, he uttered 3 words that irrevocably altered the trajectory of the moment. "You look beautiful." Tears welled up and spilled down my cheeks. There, on the pavement in front of that modest hotel, with Randall Galloway by my side, I utterly dissolved. 40 years of suppressed tears, 4 days of pervasive uncertainty and profound despair. A lifetime of subtle affirmations that I was insufficient. It all erupted in uncontrolled, wrenching sobs. He offered no further words. He made no attempt to soothe me or reassure me that all would be well. He simply took my suitcase in one hand and gently encircled me with his other arm as I collapsed against his chest. He exuded an aroma of expensive fragrance and pristine laundry, of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I had never possessed. His sweater felt soft against my cheek, and his arms were a bulwark around my trembling shoulders. "I'm so sorry," I choked out against his chest. "I apologize, Randall. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't have involved you in this predicament." "Shh," he murmured, his hand caressing my back. "You should have contacted me years ago." As my tears finally subsided, I drew back to face him, acutely embarrassed by the damp patch my weeping had left on his expensive knitwear. I must look like a complete wreck. He reached out, his touch as delicate as a whisper, and brushed a tear from my cheek. "You look like someone who has navigated a storm and emerged victorious. That, Grace, is not a wreck. That is resilience." I let out a laugh, though it emerged shaky and tinged with bitterness. "Resilience? I'm 65. I'm lodging in a rundown motel because my own son has no desire for my company. That's hardly resilience. That's pitiable." His jaw tightened, and for a fleeting instant I perceived a flicker of the annoyance he was endeavoring to conceal. "Your son is misguided. You don't know him. I don't need to know him. I know you." He paused, his hand still resting lightly on my shoulders. "Or rather, I knew you. And the Grace Thorne I knew would never abandon someone in distress. Particularly family." The way he pronounced my maiden name, as if it were a cherished memento he had preserved throughout the intervening years, caused a pang of yearning for the woman I once was to ache within my chest. "That was a lifetime ago," I responded. "I'm no longer that young woman." "Perhaps not," he conceded, "but I would very much like to meet the woman she has evolved into." He placed my suitcase in the trunk of his luxury vehicle as if it were precious cargo, not a modest bag containing the entirety of my remaining worldly possessions. As he opened the passenger door for me, I experienced a momentary sense of profound disbelief at the sheer unreality of the situation. On the morning of the fire, I had a home, a tapestry of memories, a life meticulously constructed over decades. Now I was entering the vehicle of a man I hadn't encountered in 40 years, with no foreknowledge of what lay ahead. "Where are we going?" I inquired as he engaged the ignition. "Home," he replied with simple finality. The journey spanned nearly an hour, traversing increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we reached an area previously unknown to me. Gently undulating hills were adorned with estates, concealed behind imposing stone walls and ornate iron gates, trees that appeared as though meticulously sculpted by an artist, and mailboxes that likely represented the cost of many individuals' automobiles. Randall steered into a lengthy driveway distinguished solely by a small brass plaque bearing the inscription "Galloway." The drive wound through mature arboreal specimens and impeccably maintained gardens before opening into a sweeping circular approach, before a residence that quite literally stole my breath away. It was not ostentatious or gaudy. Rather, it exuded an elegance that only genuine affluence can bestow. Subtle, assured, designed for enduring permanence. Constructed of stone and timber, featuring expansive windows that captured the afternoon sunlight, and a veranda that beckoned one to pause and linger. "Randall," I whispered, gazing upon this testament to his extraordinary achievements. This is simply astonishing." He parked the car but did not immediately exit. Instead, he remained seated, contemplating the edifice as though viewing it through my own astonished eyes. "It's rather substantial," he remarked quietly. "It always has been. I envisioned filling it someday, but—" He offered a shrug, a gesture so intimately familiar it resonated deeply within my heart. "Some aspirations don't materialize as initially planned." "You never married?" The question escaped my lips before I could exercise any restraint. He turned to regard me, his expression inscrutable. I came close on several occasions, but something was invariably absent. He paused briefly before stating, with simple directness, "You." The single word hung suspended between us in the hushed confines of the car, charged with the unspoken weight of 40 years of what ifs and could have beens. I yearned to probe further, to comprehend how I could have been absent from a life in which I had never truly participated. However, before I could formulate the query, he had already alighted from the vehicle and was proceeding to open my door. The interior of the house was even more captivating than its exterior. Gleaming hardwood floors, reminiscent of liquid amber, soaring ceilings, furnishings that might grace the pages of architectural journals, yet conveyed a sense of warmth rather than clinical detachment. Books were ubiquitous, interspersed with inviting reading chairs strategically placed near windows, and photographs artfully arranged on side tables. It exuded the palpable atmosphere of a lived-in home rather than a mere showcase of success. "Are you feeling peckish?" Randall inquired, guiding me into a kitchen that surpassed the dimensions of my former living room. "I was about to prepare lunch when you called." I realized with a jolt that I was ravenously hungry. The meager hotel breakfast of stale toast and weak coffee had done little to quell the gnawing emptiness and nervous flutter in my stomach. "I don't wish to impose," I began, but he silenced me with a look. "Grace, please, you are not an imposition. You are—" He paused, searching for the appropriate phrase. "You are the answer to a question I've been posing for 40 years. While he busied himself with preparing our meal, demonstrating a genuine culinary aptitude, moving with an effortless grace around the expansive kitchen, I found myself observing him. I studied the photographs adorning the walls, images of Randall at groundbreaking ceremonies, engaging in handshakes with prominent figures, Randall at various social functions and business dinners, invariably accompanied by elegant women, always smiling yet never appearing entirely content. "Tell me about your life," he requested, presenting me with a plate laden with perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables. "Tell me about Robert, about your son, about all the experiences I've missed." And so, over a lunch that tasted like ambrosia after days of dismal sustenance, I recounted my narrative. I spoke of my marriage to Robert, a union characterized by steadfastness and comfort, providing security and companionship, albeit lacking in passionate ardor. I spoke of David, the son I had longed for with such intensity and cherished with such fierce devotion, who had grown into a stranger, seemingly more concerned with his fiancée's comfort than his mother's needs. I recounted the years of diligently playing the role of a devoted wife, a caring mother, and a respectable widow, the devastating fire that had claimed all my material possessions, and the son who had ultimately stripped away all that remained. Randall listened intently, his amber eyes never straying from my face. When I concluded, a profound silence settled between us. "I am truly sorry," he finally stated. "I regret the loss of Robert, your home, your son, but I do not regret your call." "Why?" The question emerged, softer than I had intended. He reached across the table, his hand enveloping mine, still strong, still tender, still capable of making my heart flutter after all these years. "Because I never ceased to love you," he replied softly. "Every transaction I've finalized, every success I've attained, every dollar I've accumulated, it was all in service of becoming worthy of you when you eventually returned to me." Randall, I realize this might sound utterly absurd. I understand that 40 years represents a significant passage of time, and we are undoubtedly different individuals now. But the moment I heard your voice on the telephone today, it felt as though the missing fragment of my existence had finally slotted into place. I gazed down at our clasped hands, his tanned and meticulously cared for, mine bearing the marks of labour and the undeniable passage of my 65 years. I am not the girl you recall. You are even better, he countered. You are authentic. You have experienced life, you have loved and lost, and you have persevered. That 25-year-old girl was exquisite, but she represented mere potential. You are the woman that potential has blossomed into. His words settled around my heart like a warm embrace, mending emotional wounds I hadn't even realized were still present. For the first time in longer than I could accurately recall, I felt genuinely perceived, not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, not as a burden, but simply as myself. What transpires now? I inquired. Randall offered a smile, that same captivating smile that had ensnared me when the world felt young. Now, we endeavour to define what the remainder of our lives will resemble, together if you are amenable. As I sat in his magnificent kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of delectable food and the palpable sense of future possibility, it dawned upon me that sometimes the very fire that devastates one's current existence serves as a prelude to the life one was intrinsically destined to inhabit. Coexisting with Randall was akin to rediscovering a facet of myself that I had somehow misplaced. The initial week felt somewhat peculiar, a period of tentative interactions. As if polite strangers were sharing an unexpected living space, he graciously granted me exclusive use of the entire guest suite of his expansive residence. This accommodation comprised a chamber exceeding the size of my former living room, a private bathing area with a tub capacious enough for two, and a diminutive seating alcove overlooking his meticulously landscaped gardens. I felt as though I were residing in an opulent hotel suite, apprehensive of disturbing anything or leaving any discernible traces of my occupancy. However, Randall exhibited remarkable patience, a quality often cultivated by successful individuals. Gradually, I began to feel more at ease. He employed a housekeeper, Maria, who attended to the residence 3 days each week. Yet, on the remaining days, I found myself preparing meals for him. It commenced modestly, with brewing coffee in the mornings and assembling simple lunches. Randall, however, responded to my culinary efforts with an enthusiasm suggesting decades of reliance on buffet selections and restaurant fare. "This is absolutely extraordinary," he exclaimed one evening, savouring the chicken and dumplings I had prepared using my grandmother's cherished recipe. "I haven't experienced a home-cooked meal of this caliber in years." "It's really nothing special," I demurred, though internally a sense of pride bloomed. When, for the last time, had anyone truly appreciated my cooking? David had often voiced his discontent with my limited repertoire of 5 recurring dishes. Victoria, on one occasion, had suggested incorporating more contemporary flavour profiles into our family gatherings. Randall simply shook his head. "It's perfect, and so are you." The designation of perfect should have instilled a sense of unease. I was 65 years old, my hair revealing its grey roots, my facial lines deepening into permanent etchings. My hands bore the telltale spots of age, and my physique had softened in areas that were once firm. I was, by all conventional measures, far from perfect. Yet when Randall looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone deserving of affection, of attention, and of gentle consideration. We gradually established routines that felt as natural as the act of breathing. We shared breakfast on the rear veranda, where Randall would peruse business reports, while I observed the avian visitors at his elaborate feeders. Our afternoons were often spent strolling across the extensive grounds, where he would proudly showcase the gardens he had personally cultivated, as well as the greenhouse dedicated to his passion for cultivating orchids. The evenings were reserved for conversation. We had 40 years' worth of life experiences to bridge, and we approached this task with a deliberate, unhurried pace, akin to archaeologists meticulously examining precious relics. I recounted the profound sorrow I experienced upon Robert's passing, the pervasive emptiness that permeated the house in the subsequent months, the sheer effort required to rouse myself from bed each morning, and the profound loneliness of widowhood, along with the societal tendency to treat individuals as incomplete once their spouses are gone. He, in turn, shared details of his business ventures, chronicling its evolution from a modest construction enterprise to a sprawling development empire with projects spanning 3 states. He spoke of the various women he had dated over the years, intelligent, accomplished individuals who appeared impeccably suited to accompany him to charity galas, yet none of whom ever made him feel wholly complete. There was one woman, he disclosed one evening as we sat beside his crackling fireplace, the rain drumming a gentle rhythm against the window panes. Eleanor. She was an architect, exceptionally brilliant and beautiful. Everyone agreed we were the perfect match. A surge of jealousy, surprising in its intensity, coursed through me. What transpired? I inquired, my voice barely audible. I proposed, he stated quietly, on Christmas Eve 5 years ago. A grand gesture at a restaurant overlooking the city, complete with an expensive ring, everything she had ever expressed a desire for, and she accepted. The wedding was scheduled for the following summer. However, as the date approached, I experienced a persistent premonition that something was amiss. It wasn't with her. She was, by all accounts, the ideal partner one could wish for. The disquiet stemmed from within me. He paused, his gaze fixed upon the flickering flames. The night before the wedding, I called it off. Randall, no, what did you tell her? The truth, he responded, his eyes meeting mine with profound seriousness, that I remained deeply in love with a woman I had met 40 years prior, and it would be unequivocally unfair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. Those words struck me with the force of a physical blow. You cancelled your wedding for me? For the memory of me? For the mere possibility that someday, somehow, I might require your assistance, and you would be there, waiting. I looked at this successful, attractive man who could have chosen anyone, and struggled to process the magnitude of his confession. This is preposterous, I managed to utter. It is, he agreed. He leaned forward, gently taking my hands in his. It's even more preposterous that you kept my business card tucked away in your wallet for 40 years. He was absolutely right. We were both undoubtedly exhibiting a certain degree of irrationality. We had both been living in our own ways with the lingering spectre of what might have been. Yet, against all conceivable odds, our peculiar brand of shared lunacy had ultimately guided us back to one another. 3 weeks after my arrival, David initiated contact. I was in Randall's kitchen preparing dinner and humming a melody to myself, humming an activity I hadn't engaged in for years, when my phone rang. David's name appearing on the screen sent a familiar wave of anxiety through my stomach. Hello, dear, I said, endeavouring to maintain a neutral tone. Mum! His voice sounded peculiar, carefully modulated. I've been attempting to reach you. Your phone has been going directly to voicemail. That was indeed true. I had been deliberately screening my calls, not yet prepared to confront any potential guilt or obligations David might seek to impose. I've been occupied, I stated. Occupied with what? I understood you checked out of the hotel weeks ago. Where are you residing now? I glanced around Randall's exquisite kitchen, at the fresh floral arrangements he had brought home that very morning, at the array of elegant wine glasses displayed on the counter. I'm staying with a friend. What friend? Mum, you don't possess friends with financial means? His assumption irked me, partly because it had been a painful reality for so long after Robert's passing. I had allowed most of my friendships to gradually dwindle, feeling too weary and too proud to sustain relationships when I felt I had little to offer in return. Would that surprise you? I responded coolly. A pause ensued, and I could practically visualize him processing this unexpected revelation. Mum, I believe we need to have a conversation. Victoria and I have been discussing the situation, and we feel, perhaps, we acted with undue haste. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a period, just until you regain your footing. The offer, which would have held immense significance for me just a month prior, now felt hollow, even bordering on insulting. What prompted this change of heart? Another pause. We realized perhaps we were overly focused on our own needs. Family ought to remain united. What he truly meant, I surmised, was that he had likely gleaned from the neighborhood grapevine that his mother was no longer patronizing a budget motel. Someone had evidently observed her in the company of a well-dressed gentleman in a sophisticated automobile. David's curiosity had been piqued, and curiosity, as it turned out, had rendered him remarkably generous. "That is exceedingly kind of you to suggest," I replied. "However, I am quite content with my current arrangements." "Mum, you can't simply move in with someone you don't know intimately. It's not safe. What do you even know about this individual?" "He has never made me feel like a burden," I murmured. "He genuinely cherishes my companionship and savors my culinary creations. Every single day he assures me of my beauty. This wedding was nothing like my initial one. When I became Robert's wife, 40 years prior, the occasion was dictated by external expectations. A white gown, a church service, followed by a reception at the local hall with a disc jockey and a pay-as-you-go bar. We extended invitations to everyone we knew and even some individuals we didn't particularly care for, simply because it was the expected custom. The ceremony was a performance for the community, not a reflection of our own desires. This time, Randall and I orchestrated everything according to our personal preferences. The exchange of vows occurred in his backyard on a brisk November morning, precisely 5 months after that pivotal telephone conversation in the hotel. Randall's longtime acquaintance officiated the ceremony, and the sole attendees bearing witness were Maria, the housekeeper, and Marcus, Randall's business associate and closest confidant of 25 years. I donned a simple azure dress that Randall remarked complemented the color of my eyes. He, in turn, wore a charcoal suit that imparted an air of distinction and attractiveness. There was no ostentation, no grand display, and absolutely no pressure to impress anyone. It was simply the union of two souls who had rediscovered each other after a hiatus of 4 decades, pledging to share whatever remaining time they had. David did attend the wedding. I had wrestled with the decision of whether to extend an invitation, but Randall's counsel persuaded me to extend him one final opportunity. "He is your son," he stated with gentle finality. "You will experience regret if you deny him the chance to rectify past actions." Consequently, I contacted him a fortnight before the ceremony. "Randall and I are embarking on marriage," I informed him with a measured tone. "November 15th at 2 o'clock. You are welcome to attend, though Victoria is not." He arrived unaccompanied, appearing somewhat ill at ease in attire that likely surpassed my monthly expenditure on groceries. He offered Randall a courteous handshake. He engaged in pleasantries and even managed a peculiar smile when the officiant pronounced us man and wife. Yet I perceived a calculating glint in his gaze. The manner in which he assessed Randall's residence, his vehicle, the evident indicators of affluence. This morning I awoke embraced by Randall, my husband, within the chamber that has become our sanctuary, within the abode that is now our shared dwelling. Golden rays of sunlight cascaded through the windows, overlooking the verdant gardens, we meticulously cultivate together. The aroma of coffee prepared by Randall each morning before I stir filled the air. At the age of 66, I am experiencing a level of happiness hitherto unknown. This contentment stems not from Randall's wealth, his magnificent home, or his professional achievements, but from the profound realization that someone perceives me, truly sees me, and consciously chooses to cherish the essence of who I am. The inferno that consumed my previous existence, reducing it to embers, has, in retrospect, paved the way for something entirely new. I often contemplate as I observe Randall engrossed in his morning newspaper across the breakfast table that devastation can, in fact, be a precursor to regeneration. At times one must relinquish all that one believed was desired to discover that which is genuinely needed. And occasionally, if fortune smiles most kindly, first love is granted a second opportunity to blossom into an enduring affection. The business card I preserved for 40 years now resides in a frame upon Randall's desk in his study. It serves as a tangible reminder that some vows are indeed worth upholding, even when their fulfillment requires the passage of 4 decades. Did you find the narrative engaging? From which city are you experiencing this story? Let us connect in the comments section. If the story resonated with you, your generous support through a super thanks would enable me to continue sharing similar narratives. I am profoundly grateful for your kind encouragement and eagerly anticipate your thoughts on the story. The screen displays 2 additional life stories that I highly recommend. My channel offers a wealth of content. Please consider subscribing to ensure you don't miss future installments. Until our next life story, I send my warmest regards and deepest respect. Did you find the narrative engaging? From which city are you experiencing this story? Let us connect in the comments section. If the story resonated with you, with love and respect,